Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Deeply appreciate you all being here. You are way over there.
I know.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. I've been asked to do a little bit of a background because there are some things that a lot of people don't know in terms of how I actually got started here. So I'm just going to share a few things that I don't normally share with people about what happened to get me where I am here today. I was working a long time ago in a graphics studio. And one day, after we had just moved in, we realized that somebody had left a desk in the studio from the last occupants. And I started going through the desk and I found a deck of tarot cards in the desk. And I pulled them out. I sat on the floor and I just started reading the instructions. I had never really understood how this all worked before, and I was just playing around with the cards. A client came in who was going to have lunch with my boss, but my boss told him, please, can you wait about 15 minutes? I'm still working on something. So he sat down in the lobby, saw me on the floor with these cards, and said, oh, you do tarot. My grandma used to do tarot. Can you do a reading for me while I'm waiting? I'm like, well, I just literally opened this box of cards. I'm reading the instructions. I don't really understand how this works. And being British, he said, well, you know, just to kill the time, just for shits and giggles. I said, okay, I'll do my best. So I just started laying the cards out in the way that the instructions said to do it. I started looking at the instructions in terms of generally what the cards were supposed to mean. After a few minutes, I just kind of ignored the instructions and started getting impressions from the cards. Certain things would stand out. And I just started going with an intuitive, line of information coming through me. I had no idea what I was really talking about, and I was just saying what I felt like saying. And one of the things was, this is a client I didn't really know that well. And so some of the things I was saying to him were just kind of odd that I would say them, like, you left England to get away from your girlfriend. And I'm still looking at the cards, I'm not looking at him. So I do the whole reading, I finish, I look up at him, he's staring down at me, white as a sheet. And he said, how did you know all of that? That's all true. And I said, I don't know, I'm just got an intuition about it. From that moment forward, I realized this was something I could do. And I started doing tarot readings for different people. A couple of years later, I found online someone who said that they were teaching how to psychically, emotionally connect with people, and that he'd be willing to teach people how to do this. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting too. Let's see what we can do with that. So I literally called him up. He was back east, asked him, if I gather a number of people for a class, are you willing to fly out here and teach us this? He said yes. And so we started conducting that class. And it was about emotional linking with different people to sort of get a sense of what they were going through. He would give us a subject that he knew about and knew what their situation was, and we would go into our altered state that he taught us to go into, and we would say what we were getting, again, intuitively. And we found, again, many of us in the class could actually emotionally link with these people and say basically what they were going through. It was during that class that I was then introduced to the channel who was conducting seminars, and I decided to go into that class, not because I thought I was going to be a channel. I had already started doing a lot of research about what metaphysical things were about, and I just thought, well, this is interesting, because I thought channeling was not something that you could be taught. in reading things like the Seth material and Edgar Cayce and stuff like that, I just thought, well, it's just something that happens to you out of the blue, because a lot of people said they just kind of like conk out and suddenly they're talking and they wake up and somebody tells them, yeah, you've been talking for the last 2 hours, and they don't know that. So I said, okay, well, this is interesting. Let me see what this is all about. So that's when I went into that class, which was a series of guided meditations. Bless you. And it was a 12-week course, and about 6 weeks in is when the familiar story I usually tell happened, where we were in the meditative state and I received what felt like a telepathic hit from Bashar, a memory coming back of having to made this agreement with him in this life to do this, and the offer of, well, now you know it's time to begin if you're ready, if you still want to do this. And in that moment, you know, all of this memory and everything was coming back. I saw an image of his face. I heard the word Bashar in my head, didn't know what it meant, thought it was his name. We now know it's just an Arabic word that means messenger. The reason it was chosen that way is because I'm half Arabic in my background, but I don't speak the language. So that word didn't mean anything to me until I found out years later from someone else that the word Bashar means messenger or bringer of good news. So it was appropriate for what he was doing. But in the class, when that happened to me, I wasn't saying anything to anyone. The meditation was still going on. And this all came into my mind in a split second. But the second this happened, the entity coming through the teacher stopped teaching the meditation and turned to me and said, there's an entity here for you right now if you're ready to begin. I opened my eyes, I looked around, because I didn't know if I was hallucinating or if this was some side effect of the meditation or what was going on. But I happened to glance behind me, and one of the other classmates had somehow also picked up on the image of Bashar that I saw, and she was sketching it on a piece of paper. So I already had 2 outside validations that there was something going on beyond my imagination, and I decided to go ahead and keep practicing with it. One thing led to another. I started channeling for people in a house where a woman was doing her doctoral thesis on a connection between channeling and psychology. She would invite her friends over, I would channel for them, she would take her notes. But one thing led to another, word of mouth spread, more and more people started coming. We had to do them in 2 houses and then another house and then auditoriums and so on and so forth. I started getting invited to different cities, different countries, and here we are 40 years later, I'm still doing this. So, in a nutshell, that's sort of what happened to my ordinary life. Never thinking that this was going to be where I would wind up. So, you know, that just gives you a little bit of a background of how a path can kind of unfold for people in unusual ways, as long as you are, as Bashar says, kind of following your excitement, following your curiosity and your interests. Synchronicity will lead you to the next step and the next opportunity, even though you don't necessarily see the connections. And looking back on my life from this perspective, I can see that there were a lot of other things that happened that were actually setups to prepare me for doing this even before I knew anything about this kind of thing. So from this point of view, I can see that it's definitely something I chose as a life path, but didn't know it until I was deeply into it. So for all of you following your life paths, definitely follow your curiosity. It will lead you to where you need to be. Follow your excitement. And the one thing I like to say to people who are a little bit, maybe have a little bit of trepidation of doing that, is even before I knew about Bashar's principle of following your passion, it's just something that I always did. When I got out of high school, I had one job for 6 months as a bank teller. I knew right then that this was not something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And that's when I went into the graphic studio, because I've always been an artist. I've been drawing ever since I could lift a pencil. So it was always my particular orientation to not choose to do anything I wasn't excited about doing. And the one thing I always say is, considering that I've been doing this now all my life, it has always supported me. It has never not supported me. So I know that people get scared. It's like, well, if I follow my passion, am I going to be able to make a living? Am I going to be able to be supported in life? Am I going to be able to pay my rent? Yes, you will. It's just that you really have to have the understanding that that's where it takes you. That's how it works. Because if it didn't include the ability to be supported and allow you to continue to thrive in physical reality, following your passion would be pointless. It contains everything it needs to allow you to continue to do that when you remain in that state. So that's one of the most important things I would like to share with all of you about the whole idea that Bashar talks about following your passion and really understanding that that is a state of being that contains everything that you actually need to allow you to keep going. Make sense? Okay. So today I know we have a lot of questions. Carissa over here is going to be asking them on your behalf. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to just go ahead and allow Bashar to come through, say what he's going to say for a few minutes, and then we'll turn it over to Carissa to ask your questions. So thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a good time. Bye-bye. I always like to say this is the one thing where you get paid for sleeping on the job. See? So that's how it works.